So good evening. If you will, turn to Genesis chapter 6. Of course, going to continue in Genesis. I do appreciate everyone being here this evening. We're going to pick up from about verse 8 and continue on. This morning we looked at the evil of man, and we saw that Noah was the only righteous man. And now we want to look at the next section of the chapter, really. And we're going to look at building the ark, the preparation and things that are going on here for the flood. We know that building the ark took a long time. And as represented in this picture here, we know that Noah preached to the people and tried to get them to turn to God. And we know that no one listened. No one did that. So let's start back here at verse 8, and we'll just get back into the flow of our study. That's Genesis chapter 6, verse 8. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. This is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God, and Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now remember from this morning that Noah found grace with the Lord due to his faithful walk. Similar to Enoch, Noah walked with God. He's in very special company there. Verse 10 repeats an earlier verse telling us that Noah had these 3 sons. The eldest is Japheth, Shem is the second, and that's the line that Jesus comes from, and Ham is the youngest. Now let's move forward to our next verses 11 through 13. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth." So as we saw in earlier verses, verse 11 is telling us the earth is full of violence and corruption, ungodly people being ungodly. In verse 12, God, of course, sees this corruption. He's all-knowing. He's all-seeing. He's looking upon the earth, and indeed it is corrupt, right? So it's very apparent. It's very corrupt. Nothing is hidden from God. And he tells us, all the people of mankind, except for Noah, are being evil and wicked. And remember from verse 5, I believe it was, that every intent and thought that they had was evil. They had no thought toward God. They were just interested in their earthly, fleshly things. Now in verse 13, we see God tell Noah that he will destroy all of mankind and those other creatures that he's mentioned. Now, why is God doing this? In verse 13, he also tells us that the earth is filled with violence through them. So all this violence, all this evil, it's just evil, wicked violence is really what it comes down to, right? So that's why, and he says, then notice what he's going to use to destroy the people. He says, I will destroy them with the earth. Now, he didn't destroy the earth. He's not destroying the earth. He's using the earth to destroy them. So it's something that I think people can get confused over. But he's destroying them with the earth, right? So if you remember, if that needs an explanation, if you remember, he breaks open the things of the deep and causes all that water underground to come up, and plus the rain. So just in case, because we're going to get to that anyway, but we're not there yet. So, God always warns us of coming judgment. He always warns us. He wants us to repent and turn to him. And so God tells Noah this, and of course Noah preaches to the people to warn them. And God, when he brings judgment like this, on the earth, it's not to cause harm or suffering, it's to end harm and suffering, to make it better for those that come after, because that's what's going on. There's so much violence, there's so much harm, there's so much suffering. We think our day is bad, and at times it is really, and in places it is, but not like what God tells us it was at this time back then in Noah's day. So he's doing this to end the suffering, to end the violence. And, God wants everyone to be saved, but in the case of like Noah, preaching to these people, he's not going to force them to come to him. He wants them to, but he's not going to force them to. So we look at the next verses 14 through 16. God is telling Noah how to make the ark here. So he says, make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and outside with pitch. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark in its side. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. That probably sounds a little confusing. When I read that, it always sounds a little confusing because I'm not a builder of things. But God is telling Noah how to make this. He's telling him to cover it in pitch inside and out. That is to keep it watertight. So they don't just put a wooden boat on the ocean and water comes up in it and it ends up, sinking and drowning everybody. So it's a good thing. Then he also tells them to make rooms for the animals and for themselves. And then in verse 15 we see the dimensions of the ark. And just to give you an idea of the size of it, I've got a few pictures, but this is one. Now the way I look at cubits is kind of like the way this picture did it. They're looking at it as being 18 inches because that was kind of the accepted average. But notice what the picture says, and I've read this before. Some cubits were a little shorter or a little longer because it's supposed to be like your forearm up to the tip of your finger. And like I measured my own, and I'm not 18 inches either. I'm like 16. So it just depends on the person doing the cubits, right? They could be that subjective. It could be the royal cubit. It could depend on who is in power at the time. Nonetheless, notice how much bigger it is than this football field. It's 450 feet long, it's 75 feet wide, and it's 45 feet tall. So this is just to give us an idea, an impression of how big it is. Now some people will say that there's no way that Noah could make the ark. Now, I don't know why they really think that. They tried to give some reasons, but it wasn't anything that really made sense to me. We see all these great and wonderful creations and buildings and structures that are created thousands of years ago without our technology. You look at the pyramids, the Sphinx, all the stuff that Rome and Greece built, and things before that. You have the Mayan pyramids and stuff like that. So I didn't take that very seriously, but if you ever hear somebody say that, that's just something that some people say. They don't want to accept the Bible. They don't want to believe in the flood. They don't want to believe it was possible that Noah could do this. So we forget sometimes too. We forget these people we read about from thousands of years ago. They're smart. They're just as smart as we are, if not smarter. Everything we have is built and comes off of what they did and created. So they are at least as intelligent as we are, right? And kind of like in this one movie, there was this funny part. You have to remember, they were building and creating stuff with sticks and stones in caves and huts, right? They don't have the technology that we have, or they didn't have the technology that we have. So it's a big deal. They're really very smart people. So that's something we have to remember. And I think people, when they want to deny some of those things, they're not thinking about that. This is another comparison. Now here you'll notice their number, if you can read it, is a little different. It's 437 feet. That's because they're using a little smaller cubit in their estimation. The idea is still basically the same. You can see, let's see, I think you can see like there's a little elephant there and a giraffe. This is just to give you an idea of the size of the thing. And then of course the 747, and I don't know, Brontosaurus, Brachiosaurus, I don't know, some big saurus and some medium or smaller saurus, I don't know. But anyway, so sauruses, they're just trying to give you an idea of how big these things are. Let's see. And this picture shows, now this is theoretical, none of us have real pictures of the ark, okay? Theoretical, but just kind of an idea of what it could look like to have these different sections inside the ark, okay? So this is kind of theorized, but God did tell Noah to make these different rooms. The word there actually, the Hebrew word actually means nests, but in this context, the way it's used, it means chamber, and we translate a chamber as a room, right? So that's why we say rooms. So again, just an idea to give us an idea of how that may have been done. Now you'll notice that all the pictures I've used so far, they kind of show the ark being kind of squarish, kind of cubical, right? Well, I don't think that's really the best idea, and it's definitely not the only thought. If you've seen, I think this is a picture from, if I remember correctly, the Ark Encounter. And if you've seen this, you'll notice they have rounded the hull, the bottom of the boat more, right? And there's a reason for that. Matter of fact, most boats you see are going to have kind of a rounded hull or a rounded bottom. And that makes them more stable, especially in bad weather, and it makes them harder to capsize. And what was the ark going to go through? A lot of bad weather, right? That was the whole idea. We need to survive bad weather. So the ark most likely had a rounded hull or bottom so that it would do better. And there's also more things about that. The same is true, this is it. So also for the length to width ratio, it has this ratio of 6:1 because it's 300 long and 50 wide. And most of our modern, I guess you would say like cargo or big ships that just carry stuff, most of them are made like this, using that 6:1 ratio, because that ratio is it's just more stable. It also is less likely to capsize. And if you combine that with a rounded hull, then you would have your best likelihood to have a safe ship or a safe trip in their case. But the ark would have been at its best with a rounded hull. That's the idea. And that's probably why when they did the Ark Encounter in Kentucky that they gave it a rounded hull. So anyway, my point in all this is that God gave Noah great dimensions for the ship. He told him the best way to make it, to give them the best, the best ship they could have for what they were going to go through, because God knows what he's doing, right? I mean, he knows what it's going to go through. He knows what's coming up. So better than Noah, better than even Noah would have known, even though he told Noah about it. Now here's a quote about these, about the way we look at those dimensions, and this is from some naval architecture engineers. These are not poetic or symbolic numbers. They are functional specifications. These dimensions yield a ship with a 6:1 length to width ratio and a 10:1, which is length to height ratio, both of which are recognized in modern naval architecture as providing excellent balance between stability and seaworthiness, particularly for a vessel that is designed to survive rough seas rather than navigate with speed or maneuverability. In other words, it's not a warship. Warships, they need to be able to move, turn, and kill. So that's a different story. That's not what this is. So this just needs to be able to survive the ocean as best as possible in any bad weather. And like I said, we know the ark is intended for bad weather. It's not intended for anything else. So I thought that was a good thing to just be aware of, that we still use a lot of this same idea, this same design. Now, it's also worth noting that the word for ark here in Genesis and Noah is the same word that they use for Moses' little basket when they put baby Moses on the river and he floats down, It's the same word. The idea of the ark is it floats and preserves life. It's not really meant to be like a ship with propulsion and steering and stuff like that. Just like that little basket didn't have any of that. It's just to hold them, just to keep them safe through their passage through the storm and the flood. That's the idea. So, in this case, both of those arks, they just get their occupants to where God wants them to be, because they're trusting God is going to take care of it. And the same thing was true with baby Moses. They were trusting God that he would get Moses down there to the princess, right? Okay, so do we trust God like that? Would we get in this big old dark, ugly ship and just close the doors? I think I would want a motor and a steering wheel, but that's, I'm just saying, that's me. Sometimes it's hard. It's hard to let go and to trust God like this, but Noah and his family, they did that. And that's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. So if we go back to our verses here, if we look at verse 16, God describes or tells them about a window, which whenever I read that, I can never understand it. And I think this one image here is a pretty good representation. If you look at the top up here, it's just an opening that runs most of the length of the ark. And the idea of the word used for that window is that it allows light in. Now, of course, it's also going to help with some fresh air, which I imagine with all those animals, you're going to want some fresh air. So that's just normal. But the idea is, too, to have some light. And it's just little. You notice it's just small so that they wouldn't get flooded if this design is correct. I'm, again, kind of a little theoretical because I don't really understand how it's described well enough. And I'm not a naval engineer, so... Oh, and two, you can see where he tells them to put the door. They put it here, and I guess that's as good a place as any. I wasn't really clear on where the door should be either, so I'll just say that. All right, so let's see. One good thing about the decks that I thought about too, some animals, if you took some animals and you put them down in the lower decks and put them in the dark down there, some of them would hibernate. And so they wouldn't need a lot of attention during this flood, right? Because that's what some animals naturally do. So it was just a thought. Not every animal would do that, but some could do that, and that would make it a little easier on everybody. Let's see. Of course, we do have to remember, too, the animals and Noah, they're all vegetarians at this point. There's no danger of them eating each other, okay? That's not happening, so... Just want to mention that again. Hopefully this about the ark, has been interesting. We have to admit that some of that is some speculation, but it is based on what we have from the Bible as best we can, right? So let's move on to verse 17. Verse 17. And behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh, in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. Now here again, God is telling Noah and us that he's bringing this judgment. He is God. Only he can do this. Only he has the right to do this. And his judgment is always correct. Now, some will say that God is evil for this type of thing, but they don't know God. They don't know what God knows, which we don't know what God knows either, but I know God well enough I know he's just and fair in all that he does. And he was actually being merciful in giving them the 120 years even. Now, when we look at this, I want to address a little bit of the language that's here in our translation. Because God is telling us his intent, what he's going to do. So let's, for a moment though, go back to verse 7 in chapter 6. If we just roll back to verse 7 for a minute, we're not going to wander out of chapter 6, because if I tried to add anything to this, we would be here forever. But anyway, so we're going to roll back to just verse 7 for a minute. Did I? Okay, there we go. So verse 7, so the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing, and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. So here, God is specifically telling us who he's going to destroy, right? And he doesn't say it, but we know he means except for those on the ark. That's the exception. So let's go back to verse 17 for a second. This reads like God's going to kill everything on the earth. Just everything, right? On the planet is what I'm getting at. It sounds like he's going to kill everything on the planet. That's not really what he's saying. The problem is, when you look at the context of this, compare it back with verse 7, and look at how the word earth is used. Earth is used twice here, and we have to understand these two different forms. There's two different forms of the same word. So the first use of earth here, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth. Here, in this case, that Hebrew word, God is referring to the planet, the entire planet. He's going to flood the whole planet, right? So here, that's correct. We know this because it's the only way to destroy all flesh under heaven, in other words, under the sky. He's referring to our atmosphere, the visible atmosphere that we can see. The only way to kill everything under the sky would be to flood the entire planet. So, that's kind of two different ways to look at that tell you he's talking about the entire planet. There's more proof that he's talking about the whole planet, but for now, I just want to focus on this verse. So here, God is telling us he's going to flood the planet. Now, the second use of earth comes further down. He says, everything that is on the earth shall die. That should be everything on the dry land shall die. Everything that, like us, we require dry land. We can't swim in the ocean forever. So a flood will kill us, right? He's talking about everything that is on the dry land, not everything on the earth, because the fish, the aquatic animals, a lot of amphibians, a lot of animals will survive. All the vegetation will survive. So it's not everything. And he's talking about destroying man primarily, but he's also going to destroy those animals, and he's telling us that. So if you look at this word and see that it's those two different forms and taken two different ways in this context, with the understanding of what he's previously told us, it makes more sense. The flood will be worldwide, but a flood wouldn't kill fish anyway. A flood is not going to kill whales anyway, that type of thing. So, now I know there's a lot of people that like to say the flood was regional or it was local. There's a lot of problems with that. The main and first problem with that, in my opinion, is that when you say the flood was local or regional, you're calling God a liar. He's saying he's going to flood the whole earth, and not to be mean, but you're being kind of like Satan when you say God's lying, right? Because that's what Satan did in the beginning. He said what God said was not true. So I don't expect any of us are doing that, so don't take offense. But anyway, that's the first main problem I see with that. Okay? It wasn't a local flood. God plainly tells us that all the creatures on the dry land will die, and except for those on the ark, and the only way to do that is a global flood. It's simply not possible to kill everything on dry land in a local flood. And if you had a local flood, let's say we had a flood here and Worcester and all the animals were washed away, animals from the surrounding areas are just going to creep back in. You've not killed all the animals, right? Nature is the way God made it. They're just going to come back in and fill it up. So there wouldn't be any need for an ark, because you've got all those animals are just going to, kind of come back in and fill everything up. So you wouldn't even need an ark if you're just having a local flood. And with 120 years, Noah could have walked far enough away to get away from a local flood. This doesn't even make sense when you look at it logically. So I just want to make sure that we understand that. Also, pardon me, also, the flood is responsible for a lot of things we see. All those millions of fossils, or at least a great number of them, I shouldn't say all, because there's been other catastrophes, but a lot of the fossils we see are due to the Great Flood. These animals were buried quickly, and that made the fossils. Fossils can't sit and form over millions of years. The flood created all the rock layers we see, like when you go to the Badlands or the Grand Canyon and you see all these lines of different things. The flood created those rock lines, because those can't be done by just laying them down slowly over millions of years. And even non-believing scientists, like they don't believe in the Bible or the flood, are starting to realize that doesn't work the way they originally thought. So, and the flood also created a lot of canyons. Not glaciers slowly melting over millions of years, but the flood created a lot of canyons. I've seen that in my own personal life when you have a flood, how it changes the rivers and the creeks, and how it makes basically like mini canyons out of things, because my flood wasn't worldwide. So, but anyway, maybe we can address some of those things more in the future, but for right now I just wanted to mention some of that. If we move forward to verse 18, Genesis chapter 6, verse 18, "But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you." So we see God establishing this first official covenant with someone, with Noah. He didn't really have a covenant quite like this with Adam, if you remember. He had told Adam what not to do, but he didn't really have like a covenant quite like this. So God is going to deliver Noah and his family and all these animals. But here he's telling Noah part of the covenant here, and then he's going to tell Noah what he and his family need to do, right? He's already told him he's going to build the ark, but now there's a little more. So if we look at the next couple of verses 19 and 20, "And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds after their kind, of animals after their kind, and of every creeping thing of the earth after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive." So Noah's being told that these animals, you notice verse 20, they will come to you. God is going to send these animals to him. And Noah's responsibility is to keep them alive and get them on the ark and keep them alive. Now, this would mean there's going to be like 2 dogs. There's going to be like 2 cats. Now, there's not going to be 2 of every variety of dog, because you don't need that. God is going to send the ones that he needs to repopulate the earth. So it's not going to be like a zillion dogs, because there's a zillion varieties of dogs that we've created. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be like 2 dogs, 2 cats, 2 squirrels, 2 horses, that type of thing. Not every different breed, because just like Adam and Eve had all the genetics for all of our variety, these animals that God is going to send, they will have all the genetics for all that variety that will happen, because he's God and because he knows what he's doing. Let's see. So, all right. So if we look at our next verse, Genesis chapter 6, verse 21, God also tells Noah to take food, right? So, and you shall take for yourself of all food that is eaten, and you shall gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them, the animals. Remember again, they're all vegetarian, so this makes it a lot simpler. That's still a lot of food though, because it's still a lot of animals. So they've got to gather and take up a lot of food. So I imagine that somebody's got a big farm here going or something. I don't know any other way to do that. But anyway, it would still be a challenge because it would have to be a lot of food. Now, I want us to look at the last verse of this chapter, chapter 6, verse 22, and just see how Noah reacts to this. Thus Noah did according to all that God commanded him, so he did. Noah, just being a just man, a man that's walking with God, he did all that God commanded. And in closing, I just want us to consider a couple ideas related to what we've read about here. Do we do all that the Lord has told us to do? We have to examine ourselves. I can't examine you. I've got my own log in my eye, but we can examine ourselves, right? Examine ourselves. Are we doing what we're supposed to do? And when we compare ourselves to Noah, do we have the faith, the guts, the fortitude to trust God like Noah? Could we step out by ourselves alone and be a preacher of righteousness if we needed to? Could we work on building a boat for 70 to 100 years, however long it took him to build that? All of these things, it involves a lot of faith and a lot of action on faith. It's not just, Noah's not just sitting back believing. Well, I believe it'll happen. He's doing. He's acting on that faith. So, will we trust God with our lives going forward? Do we trust God with our lives? Do we trust Jesus and believe and trust in His salvation? Do we have that kind of faith? So, I just want to make sure that we're ready and that we would build ourselves up in the Bible and in prayer to be more like Noah. Because Noah is a good example in all of this and what he does and how he reacts to the Lord. And we just need to trust the Lord. And if anyone here would need any help this evening with that in any way, if there's anything we could do for you, if you're subject to the call in any way, please just let it be known as we stand and sing.